Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Before you pick up another Udemy course or do another 100-hour YouTube tutorial, or in general just follow along with watching somebody type and then typing what they type, I want to walk you through my 6-step system for creating a really good side project. I've used this system before to learn all sorts of stuff, change stacks just for fun, build interesting things, build failed startups, build not failed startups, and just generally learn how to write code as a software engineer. And if you're really beginning in your career, or if you're just learning how to code, I don't maybe suggest doing this. I think there's nothing at all wrong with doing a tutorial. If you are doing a tutorial, however, I suggest you follow the pattern of watching what they do and then extending what has been done. So for example, if you're following along with a basic HTML and CSS tutorial and they make a button that's like blue, maybe make a different button that's red. Do something like that where you're extending what you're learning. But if you are beyond the very basics of tutorials, which I really think you should get by and past as soon as you possibly can. And by the way, if you don't know the basics, or you're wondering, how do I even know the basics? Like, what are the basics exactly? Join dev30.xyz or go to the ultimate JS guide that I've attached to the show notes here, or you can go on our site at parsity.io and grab it. And that should get your hands dirty and get you to some what I consider basics. Once you're past that, though, you want to make a complex side project. Why do you want to make a complex side project? Because that's going to mimic what you're going to experience on the job. This is what separates good engineers from great ones. And I don't think that everybody has to have a side project, but I will say this. Most of the engineers that I've worked with over the years that are really good at what they do have had a side project. And I kind of don't like this advice that you don't have to have a side project or do anything outside of work in order to succeed as a software engineer. And I highly disagree. If you come from a non-traditional background, or if you are learning how to code, side projects are really important, but not for the reason that you probably think they are. Side projects probably will not get you hired directly, but they will indirectly get you hired, meaning that the skills that you pick up from the side project are the things that are going to translate into actionable things you can do on the job. But in general, like, no one's going to sit around saying, hey, show me your side project. I want to look over your app that you deployed somewhere and then judge you based on it and decide to offer you a job, whether or not I like your portfolio or side project. So no, I think those days are far behind us, and for very good reason. By the way, when I'm doing side projects, I have a full-time job as an engineering manager, by the way, and I've worked as a software engineer for a while now. No one's going to ask to see some project I worked on at my previous company, because guess what? It's private. You can't just show people the code you worked on at the last company. You say, well, no, obviously I can't show you that. That's not my code to show you. I was paid to write that code for somebody else. So this idea that you have to have this running portfolio as a software engineer is a little bit antiquated. It's just kind of an old school way of thinking. And I talked to a lot of applicants for Parsity, and they're saying, well, what kind of portfolio projects are we going to do? And I'm honest with them. You're going to do a lot of projects in Parsity, quite a few, but none of them are going to really be things that you are going to want to necessarily show off to an employer. I mean, maybe a couple of them, maybe the last couple that you make, you may want to show off to an employer. But what they're going to ask about mostly is, tell me what you've learned. Tell me about an interesting problem that you've solved. How did you solve that? You can look at the projects that you make in Parsity or on your own using the system, which I'm about to tell you. These are the kinds of things that you can look back on and share with people your experience about what you learned. So you want to create a great side project. I think I've sold you on that. You want to increase your hireability, your skill set, expand your knowledge, maybe your salary, So I'm going to walk through that step-by-step process to do that. And when I first started coding professionally, I used AngularJS, C#, SQL. Not the most cutting-edge stack, even for back then. And the next role was React, Node, and Mongo. And I got that job as a mid-level developer. And you might think, well, how did you do that? You had a completely unrelated stack. And the way I did that was by building a complex web app using those technologies for a failed startup. I got some dudes together. Actually, they got me. We all got together and we said, let's build up this really complex real estate app, and we're going to become millionaires from releasing this real estate app. 3 years later, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours, tons of work. We had a guy from Google working on it. The other guys became, into real estate and are doing really well on their own ventures, but we failed miserably at this app. But it was still worth it. All that time, very much worth it. I learned stuff I never would have been able to learn on my own through the job, and it helped me accelerate my career much, much faster. And so whether you are a mid-level developer, senior developer, or just learning to code, I think this is a really good set of steps to create a solid side project. So step one, API. The API is the layer at the heart of the application. If you're stuck on what to build, you always start with the API. Why do you start with the API? Maybe you're saying, wait, what is API? He just said API like 3 times. API, Application Programming Interface. So there are different services out there, Instagram, Twitter, Tinder, I don't know, Match.com, whatever. They have APIs, meaning they have some data that they can share with you and that they'll expose to you. And they'll say, hey, here's some data that we have that we'll let you borrow. We'll let you borrow some of our functionality. Maybe it's free, maybe it's not free. So if you don't really know what to build, I suggest you start with the API. A good API has documentation. It lets you know how you can test the functionality. It usually has some sort of URL that is publicly available that you can check out. Here's a list of some you can start with: programmableweb.com, free APIs at GitHub, or Rapid API. And nowadays, I might look at OpenAI, which is not free, but is also not prohibitively expensive. Really good places to start with the API. So you start with an API, you say, okay, cool. Like I'm using the Tinder API. Maybe, I don't know. I doubt they have that for free. Anyway, let's pretend that you're using the Tinder API and you're thinking, what can I build around this? Well, let's say the Tinder API gives you an array of objects, and those objects contain like coordinates for people in your area that are male, female, and other. And you're looking for all the males and females that are within 10 miles of you that also like to eat hamburgers on Sunday or whatever. You have some sort of criteria that you want to filter through this list of people. That could be interesting. You could say, I'm going to make a dating app for people that love to eat hamburgers on Sunday, or ones for elephant lovers, or whatever weird type of hobby they may have. And you might think, yeah, cool, this is like a weird little Tinder clone type of thing, but it's like not a Tinder clone. It's like something related to it. You can do that with all sorts of different APIs. In fact, there's a lot of companies that make money essentially doing just that. They'll look at some API, they'll think, what can I build off of that? For example, OpenAI, which is the API behind ChatGPT. Somebody may think, what if I could use that to give people diet plans based on some sort of information that they give me? And I can just wrap an app around that API and then sell it to people. That is honestly how a lot of startups are formed. And so picking an API is a great way to start when you don't know what you want to do. If you already know what you want to do, you can kind of skip that part. You think, I don't need an API. Maybe I want to do a note-taking app. Maybe all I need is a database at that point. I don't need some third-party integration. But most people don't know what they want to build. And so I think picking the API is the best place to start. Cool, you got the API. Now, let's pick a framework. And I'm going to make this real simple for you. There are 3 that you should consider and 1 that you should really do. Next.js, Angular, or Vue. Which one do you think you should pick? If you said Angular or Vue, wrong. You should be picking React, Next.js. And why should you be picking that? In my opinion, it is the most safe bet out there. And I know there's somebody out there listening right now that's thinking, that's not true. You should use Vue or Angular or Solid.js or Svelte or whatever. And yeah, those are cool, but they're so far behind where React is as far as popularity that it's not even close. So if you're wondering what to pick to be safe, just pick React and Next.js. If you already know React and Next.js, and you're like, yeah, I'm kind of bored with that, then pick something else. The good rule of thumb is to pick a framework you're interested in learning about or diving deeper into. So if you use React at work, maybe you don't use TypeScript. Good opportunity to incorporate TypeScript. You also want to choose a state management library as part of a sophisticated app. And if you're not at that point yet where you understand what is state management, don't worry, you can totally skip that part. I would suggest using Redux or React Query or some sort of other library that maybe you've heard of that you're thinking, I don't really know how to use that, but I'm going to force myself to learn in this one. So now you've picked your framework, Next.js, hint, 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 and you have your API. Cool. You think, okay, I got my API, I got the framework. Now, the back end stack. This is assuming you're going to build a full stack application, because in my opinion, all developers at this point should be comfortable on both ends of the stack. It is actually rare, in my opinion, to see a completely dedicated front-end developer or a completely dedicated back-end developer. I would say back-end developers tend to be more isolated in the kind of work they do. But nowadays, front-end has basically just come to mean JavaScript developer. So it's not uncommon to be like, I'm a front-end developer, but I'm also working on APIs, and I have to debug Mongo queries or even write SQL queries, like, non-trivial SQL stuff. It's very, very common, especially at smaller companies where they don't have enough money or time to have two different teams that are completely separated. So picking a backend stack is going to teach you a lot more about the backend than maybe you might get on the job or maybe at your boot camp. At Parsity, by the way, plug, we do a lot of backend stuff. We do authentication, Node Express, SQL, and quite a lot of our students have gone on to be backend developers, which is kind of cool, I think. I don't see that at a lot of full stack boot camps. So the backend stack, the application API. So this is the API that you own, the backend portion that handles and persists all the data, needs to be stored in a database. Parsity teaches Node and Express. Maybe you're like, I'm kind of bored of Node and Express. I want to pick Python, Django. By the way, Node Express being another very, very safe bet. It's super popular, very, very well used, and a ton of companies are still using it. Python, Django being another very popular choice. Maybe you want to use Go or Scala or whatever. And for the database, you have some economical, aka free choices out there. MongoDB. AWS offers a similar type of offering, DynamoDB. And of course, there's SQL. Of course, there's now, what's it called? Supabase is another one out there that's really cool if you're into the SQL offering, PostgreSQL. There's tons of free stuff out there to use. I've named off a few things. So Node Express being like the code base you'd want to write for the backend stack, or maybe Python or Scala. Those are backend languages and frameworks. And then for the database, you have MongoDB or DynamoDB, SQL, and Supabase. Those are some good options right there. Now for the fun part. Maybe this is the fun part. Maybe this is the part you hate. Pick a CSS framework. Bootstrap? Maybe. You could use Bootstrap. It's still widely used. It's not bad to use. Right now, I'd probably be learning Tailwind, maybe Material UI, maybe AntD. AntD being a lot less popular, Material UI being fairly popular, Tailwind becoming like the choice nowadays for modern web design. And also Bootstrap. Honestly, Bootstrap's not going anywhere yet. It's definitely not as popular as it was, but it's also so ubiquitous on the web that, hey, you might as well pick it up if you have not. Or what about this? Here's a novel idea for you. Plain CSS. That's right. No framework at all. Plain old CSS. Maybe CSS modules. What I'm getting at is, pick something you don't maybe know that well and decide this is going to be the way I learn it. I'm going to learn trial by fire, which is also, by the way you're going to learn on the job. A lot of times you're going to get to a job, you're going to say, my boot camp or my university or whatever program taught me this. They're going to say, that's great, but you know what? We're using this. So you learned X, we use Y, and then your next job is going to use Z. So you're going to have to figure out how to pick up these things anyway. So this is a really good low barrier, low risk environment for you to try out different stuff. Okay, so we got the CSS framework. We got the backend stack. We got the Next.js framework. We got the API picked out. Okay, now we got to think, how does this all get pieced together? This is where a little bit of your project management and planning is going to come in handy, which is a really important skill as a software developer. I think there's this idea, myth maybe, that developers are like just coding in silence in a room or something like that and are not in meetings half the day like we typically are. A lot of what we do as developers is planning out what we're going to build so we don't code ourselves into a hole or a corner. Think about this. You are using the Tinder API to match burrito-loving elephant enthusiasts within a 10-mile radius of you, and you start coding it up, and you realize at some point, wait a second, I didn't make any user database here. I assumed that I was the only user. Uh-oh. What happens now? I've coded myself into a corner. I didn't think about how do I handle, X amount of users. I only thought about me I didn't even think about a login system. I thought, well, what happens if another user wants to come on? How do we determine who's who and show them their matches? What about how do they save matches? How should I organize my database and data and the whole flow in order to facilitate all these different functionalities I want to have? Basically, how do I make sure this thing works in the way I expect? So this part is kind of fun because it's just a lot of sketching things out. This is actually the most difficult part, in my opinion. And that's why I suspect most people fall back on to-do lists or weather apps or movie finders because they are littered across the internet. There's nothing wrong with these at all. In fact, at Parsity, we do a couple of these ones. They're great to learn. But when you want to do your own thing, you got to think, well, how is this supposed to work? So again, start with the API. What are the interesting features you can leverage? The city of San Francisco used to offer an API to search for violent crime, and you could return the coordinates of crime events, and displaying that information on a map might be interesting. So I would map out the basic user flow, use a tool like Excalidraw, use a piece of paper. It doesn't really matter. It can be really crude. It does not have to be something that looks appealing to the eye, my friend. You can draw some crude sketches of the main screens. Don't get too caught up in the details. And remember this acronym, MVP, minimally viable product. I would change that to MUP, minimally usable product. What do you have to have for this to be usable? What does a user have to have? Focus on those. The problem most people take is that they think way too deep of what they need to build. I'm going to build the next Facebook. No, you're not. You couldn't even build the next chat box in Facebook. That alone is a monumental task. You need to pick a tiny, tiny slice of the features you want to have and think, what do I have to have here in order for this to be kind of usable? And that's going to bring you close enough to a point to build something and then keep adding to it. Because then you may walk from this side project and think, you know what? I'm kind of done with this side project. I'm not really feeling it anymore. I'm kind of ready to skedaddle on here. You don't want to do that too early, though. You want to actually build something, though, right? So, make sure you're building something that's actually doable in the time that you have, which is going to be usually your weekends or mornings or just your spare times. You don't want to be too ambitious here. I mean, you're already going to be doing all these new things and learning lots of different, maybe back-end languages and frameworks and other things. Make sure that you're building something that's actually going to be able to get done in that time. Okay, cool. Now we're at the next part where the whole world gets to see your beautiful, janky app. You want to host it somewhere. And maybe you thought, Heroku? Netlify, perhaps? I'm going to make a bold statement here. You should be using AWS. Nearly every company uses AWS. AWS meaning Amazon Web Services. There are free tiers on it. They have all sorts of cool services like EC2 for managing servers, Amplify for deploying your code directly to the web, code pipelines to check your code quality, Lambdas to spin up servers on demand, all sorts of interesting tooling that typically you're not going to get exposed to on the job unless you're doing maybe DevOps or backend stuff. But this is your opportunity to dive in and go goof around back there. You can go as complicated or as simple as you want. If you want to go really simple, use Amplify. If you want to go really complicated, use EC2. If you want to go somewhere in the middle, maybe try Lambdas out. There's a ton of documentation on Lambdas. In fact, I even have a challenge that I've given to people in the past, how to deploy a TypeScript Lambda on AWS, and it goes through all the gotchas that I've gone through. If you're interested in getting it, reach out to me. I'll send it to you. In Parsity, by the way, we switched to render.com and Vercel. Excellent choice and kind of your only choice for Next.js at this point. But for the backend, I would totally go with AWS because that's going to teach you a hell of a lot about using a tool that most Fortune 500 companies are using. I think they're almost at 100% coverage for Fortune 100 companies, meaning most Fortune 100 companies are using AWS. So this is going to help you speak intelligently about DevOps issues or about hosting, about server related things. It's going to help you speak about the kind of language that your peers are going to be using at work outside of React code, JavaScript code. You're going to be talking about more high level stuff. And nowadays things are moving towards more high level, meaning that people assume you can code at some point. After the first year of coding, people say, yeah, we all understand you can code. That's an expectation. But now your true power and the way you will impress people and become more of an asset is understanding the entire picture. How much can you understand the entire system in which your code is operating? Do you understand how it's being deployed? Do you understand that your code on your computer is different than the code that's out in AWS on an EC2 instance? or that the code that you push to the front end is out there on a Vercel instance out there in the cloud somewhere. And if you can understand that and speak intelligently about it, it's going to not only help you get a much deeper understanding of system design, but also like how to troubleshoot really difficult issues that happen when you deploy code outside of your machine. So once it's outside of your machine, all sorts of things can go wrong, and they will. And the more you're exposed to that, the better. So wrapping up, it can be tempting to use all the new technologies when you're building a side project. So I would suggest picking maybe 50% new technologies and 50% familiar choices, maybe even 75% familiar choices and like 25% new stuff. The real goal, I think, is getting it hosted out there and then experimenting with the differences in the environments that you're using, saying, okay, cool, this worked on my local machine. Why is it not working out here? How can I troubleshoot that? That's going to eat up a lot more time than you could imagine. And then planning it out. Like, how do you plan out all the different features? And then when you plan out that first set of features, have you made it scalable and malleable or open enough that you can add more features without breaking the current features? So it can be overwhelming doing all this stuff. So try your best to not get caught up in doing all the new technologies. Realize that, throughout your career, you'll probably be doing lots of side projects and learning lots of new things all the time. This is, again, a low barrier, low risk way to do that. And the cool thing about being a software developer, unlike being like a car mechanic or like a doctor, is, you can build all sorts of cool stuff for free. If you're a car mechanic and you want to work on a Porsche, well, good luck. If you're a doctor, you want to learn how to do open heart surgery, well, you're going to need to go to some expensive school and find a human willing to do that, or a cadaver or something like that. With technology, it's great. We can do really amazing things for free, and you could do stuff that people only dream of by just, adding an account somewhere, making up a fake account, and then opening up a free tier on one of these services I've just mentioned. So the high level goal here is to build something complex, which you can deploy and then iterate on. You're going to learn a hell of a lot more than following another to-do app. Good luck. Have fun with this. And if you're tired of doing endless tutorials, you're ready to finally learn to code, join us at parsity.io. Or if you need to learn JavaScript, dev30.xyz. And if you want that TypeScript Lambda tutorial with the code base, just reach out to me. You can go to the Parsity site and you can find my email or something like that, or find me on LinkedIn, and I will send it to you because I like you. Anyway, have a good one. See ya. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.